Is everybody here? We were all catching up and meeting everybody. And we have Eduardo from Europa Editions here with us. And we have Michael from Europa is here. And what we'll do is, if it gets too crowded on the online, on your Zoom portion, I'll have you guys submit your questions in chat. And but without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest for tonight. I'm going to set the Zoom over here so you can see the guest. And without the mic, it might be a little different, but I'm going to turn the volume up as loud as we can. And if there's any problems later, I'm also recording this so that you guys can get the benefit of the whole discussion in case it winds up not being as not as audible as we'd like.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So sorry about the slow start. But what I'd like to do is introduce our guest for the night. We're really excited because all the way from Italy, Maria Donatella, all the way from Italy. And I'm going to just officially introduce her. She lives in Penne, Abruzzo, where she practices as a pediatric dentist. And from the age of 9, she's been writing stories, fables, poems, and novels. Her short fiction has been published by Granta Italy, and her novel Bella Mia was nominated for the Strega Prize and won the Brancati Prize. A Girl Returned, which some of us here have read, her third novel won the Campiello Prize. A Sister Story was a finalist for the 2021 Strega Prize and a New Yorker Best Book of 2022. Brittle Age, her fifth novel, won the Strega Prize in Italy, and that's coming out here soon in English. And also tonight, we're honored to have esteemed translator in Goldstein. She's translated into English all of Elena Ferrante's books, including the New York Times bestsellers The Lying Life of Adults and The Story of the Lost Child, which was also shortlisted for the International Booker Prize. She's been honored with a Guggenheim Fellowship and is the recipient of the Pan Renato Poggioli Award, I don't know if I said that right, Translation Award. She lives in New York. So we are thrilled to have There is a step here, but there's also another step on the side, so you can choose whether this step is too steep or if you'd rather have the shorter steps. Okay, the shorter steps, great. That's wonderful. And if we have any translation issues, Eduardo is here to translate for us. And so I'd like to start off with to see how many of you were able to read the book tonight. Oh, fantastic. A Sister Story. How many of you read A Girl Returned also? Okay. Oh, that's great too. I said to Eduardo earlier, I just noticed the parallels of the openings of the door. The one book opens with Adriana opening the door and the other with the narrator opening the door, the parallel action in the two books. I thought was just some, each time you reread something, you notice something fresh. Something new every time. So, I would try to refrain from sprinkling in the teeny tiny bit of Italian words that I know. We have another possible translator here, and Anne, of course, will translate all the time. Are you more comfortable translating the written word? Yes. Okay. Well, we have Eduardo here, so you can enjoy yourself. I am going to start. I do know one person that has a question, and I gave him an assignment because he's read A Sister Story in Italian and in English, and so he has a question to do with translation. Yeah, and Pablo, you're up. Are you there?
Yeah, hi, I am.
Okay, we can hear you.
Real quick, Sharon's on the chat. She got kicked off from the Zoom.
Oh, I see her now.
Okay, good.
She's there, yeah.
All right. Well, buonasera a tutti. My name is Pablo. Yeah, I've read Portugal Sud and A Sister Story over the last little while. It was quite an exercise to read both of them back to back. In its original language and its English translation. And basically, my question is, it is said that Italian is probably one of the most musical languages there are. And sometimes the poetry in certain passages can may not be entirely conveyed in its right original form. And I just wanted to ask, how do you overcome such challenges? I mean, by reading both books, I get the same story, but there's always a certain nuance, and I was just wondering if you could enlighten us on that. And also a question directly. Yeah, I'm sorry. Basically, it's that. Sorry, I kind of feel I was put on the spot there. Straight from the beginning.
Oh, well,
Basically, my question would be, if I can summarize it without going all over the place. How do you find a way to keep the music and the poetry within? How do you transmit that in the English translation?
well, naturally you don't. But you try. I mean, you try. My method is to try to stay as close to the Italian text as I can without forcing the English, without making it awkward, without.
I don't think we can do anything.
Oh, wait, what am I supposed to do?
Closer to the, louder to the,
Yes.
Sorry.
point your voice to the screen.
Wait, what
I don't
happened?
think they.
They weren't able to hear on the laptop.
Well, what I just want to, I mean, I think my method, if I have one, is to try to stay with the text pretty closely. And not, I don't mean word for word, but I
Yeah.
mean, I think that, and, you know, without torturing the English. But, you know, whatever, I mean, I try to make it musical. It can't be musical the way the Italian's musical. But another time when I heard Donatella speak, she talked about how she was always paring down her sentences and her sentences really. And that to me was really useful advice. So when I'm working on her books, I really do try to focus on making it lean, making it not have a lot of extra words that you might need. Well, sometimes you always need extra words, but I mean, I'm trying to keep it really sort of without fat. Yes, I guess I said that twice. So that's really my. I mean, that with Donatella, that's what I focused on. Great. Can Donatella speak to that? Working with the translator and.
Intanto buonasera a tutte e tutti voi, sono molto emozionata, felice per la mia prima volta a New York e anche per questo primo incontro con le lettrici e i lettori che siete voi, e anche per chi è collegato. E posso dire che per gli scambi che abbiamo avuto negli anni, Anne e io, mi sento totalmente affidata e con tutta la mia fiducia, perché so che il lavoro che Anne fa sul testo è il migliore che un'autrice o un autore possa desiderare.
I'll translate. She said, thank you very much to all of you who are here. She's very happy to be in New York for the first time, meeting readers in person and in Zoom. And regarding the question of translation, Donatella has total trust in Anne's work.
Her total mandate.
Yes, they've collaborated now for a few years, and based on their exchanges and the questions that Anne asked during the work that they do together, she couldn't have hoped for a better translator.
Questa scrittura che io uso in sottrazione, questa scrittura sgassata, che rinuncia o cerca di rinunciare a tutto ciò che è superfluo, può sembrare nella lettura molto, molto semplice, molto facile, ma posso assicurare da parte mia come autrice, ma credo anche nel lavoro di traduzione, non è affatto facile, affatto semplice e richiede molto, molto lavoro, appunto di rinuncia, di eliminazione anche di ciò che può sembrare bello ma che per me è superfluo. Credo che questo comporti anche delle difficoltà aggiuntive di traduzione. Scusami Anna.
And blushing because she got so many compliments.
Yeah.
I'll
So
let
what
Colin
Donatella just said is she's aware that her style that is so much based on subtraction. She called it deflated. Or deflated writing style can seem simple, can seem easy. You know, the first impression can be that, but she's aware that that's not the case. That it's actually really hard to render that in another language, and she's sure that you know the process of subtraction and elimination that she follows in Italian might pose challenges for an English translator. Sometimes you have to choose to eliminate something that might seem beautiful, like you know a flourish, or to add something, but that she thinks it's actually superfluous. So this pared down style she thinks is challenging, and that she apologized to her. You know?
No, but as someone who writes poetry, I relate to that. You clean it, you take away what you don't need. You know. So.
Well, and that's the problem. That's one of the problems, and that is that what might be superfluous in Italian in English doesn't come through. So you might have to, you know, add. Well, I try not to add anything, but rearrange. Let's say. And so I think that's one of the things that's hard about her style. That, as she says, it seems simple, but there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
And the fact that this is not really about her style, but the fact that all of her books are very complex in terms of time, and they go back and forth in not just 1 or 2 or 3 time frames, but 6 or 7 sometimes, and that too makes it more complicated. You have to be sure that that it's clear where you are.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that that's sometimes difficult too.
Do you maintain the same chapter breaks and things like
Yes,
that?
yes, all that.
Okay. I mean, that all seems, because it's so well planned.
Yeah.
That's, you know, it's very musical. So have you two worked together on the Brittle Age, right? That's coming up?
Yes.
Yeah. What's the title in Italian for the Brittle Age?
L'età fragile.
Because A Sister's Story has a very different title, Borgo Sud.
Yes.
Yeah. How did you, I'm gonna, let me look at the screen just for a minute. I guess I should explain maybe to our guest here that we've maintained a hybrid format after Zoom. We had such, people moved away, people still want to be part of the book club. So that's why we do the hybrid format. And usually we're, you know, in a circle, and you know, so there's a little more give and take. But this is a unique opportunity to have these two wonderful artists here that we can fit in some questions as we can. I'm going to see if someone from the audience has a question. Oh wait, I'm sorry, I didn't finish my thought. A Sister's Story is Borgo Sud, and I did want to ask them how they came to that. How they came to that idea of that translation into A Sister's Story. How that came about.
Well, obviously it's not a translation.
Right, not a translation, yes, not a translation, but how you came about this.
Michael, you might remember better.
Oh, Michael's responsible for this.
I think we discussed the possibility of having you know the southern neighborhood, the southern quarter, and it just didn't seem to make sense in English. And A Sister's Story had been discreetly successful. It had found quite a few readers in English thanks to Anne's translation, Donatella's wonderful storytelling, and so we wanted to have a title that was accessible, that wasn't going to confuse him. I think we also contemplated at a certain point just leaving the Italian Porco Sud.
But it seemed to
but it was going to push off a certain kind of reader, right? And we wanted to get around that. So let's get around it.
Well, it plays well with Girl Returned.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
What's the Italian title?
I can't pronounce it.
La
Minuta.
No, La Minuta.
Girl Returned.
The Girl Returned.
La Minuta.
La Minuta. You want to say wrong. It
Maybe
means
you
the
could ask
Girl
Donatella
Returned.
about La
Like,
Minuta.
yeah, literally.
So it's
L
literal
apostrophe, Girl Returned. La Minuta. So it's not they have it in the first book, so it's explained in the first book, which is really like, I totally recommend. Yeah, so it's a nice pairing, and I can't wait to read Middle Age too. So let me ask the audience here. Do you guys have someone have a question at the ready? You don't have to go on the spot. We have questions on the screen too. I just wanted to make sure I was
I've got
accommodating.
one,
Oh,
if
Michael's
I
got
may.
one. Yes, Michael's got one.
The conversation that you just had about prose and style and the language that Donatella uses and as a translator, I'm just curious if Donatella has a similar idea when it comes to the actual storytelling, to plotting. Is there that same process of paring down to the essential and cutting out all that is superfluous?
Okay. I think you probably heard that. I was trying to move closer to Michael with the screen, but he was talking about if that same process of paring down takes place in the when in the process of planning the book and in the plotting and in the narrative structure. If she starts with more and then carves away at that, also like a block of marble. Just like the story waiting to be discovered. Did you explain that question, Michael's question? Do I have this at the right angle so you guys so they can see they can see you in this little square here?
They don't need to see me, but yeah.
Well, okay. So, but you're next.
Yeah,
to
I can see myself.
Okay.
Intanto sono molto contenta, Michael, per questa domanda che non mi è mai stata fatta, ma è una bellissima domanda perché questo metodo, che poi è un non metodo, di sottrarre viene sempre visto riferito alla lingua, ma non alla struttura dei romanzi, non alla storia, non ai personaggi, non all'ambientazione, e invece riguarda tutto, è un metodo generale.
She's very happy she's very grateful for this question that she's never been asked before, but she thinks it's really important. Very often this reference to subtraction, to a pared down style is made in reference to the writing, the language, but very rarely we talk about how it can be applied to the plot, the characters, the narrative, and she thinks, in her writing that it applies across the board to all of these elements of the novel.
Per me, da lettrice, è molto fastidioso leggere libri che mi raccontano tutto, che mi consegnano tutto, perché quando questo accade io mi sento da lettrice relegata in un ruolo passivo in cui ricevo solamente e l'autore mi dà tutto. Quando scrivo io cerco di non fare quello, cerco di lasciare degli spazi vuoti che nella lettura possano essere completati, riempiti da chi mi legge. Per me questo è molto importante.
You remember all this?
Yes, more or less. She so she thinks she finds it kind of annoying when she's reading a book or reading a novel when the book explains to the reader everything. When the book like tells you everything. It feels like a book like that relegates the reader to a sort of passive position. There's no space for interpretation. Whereas like what she's trying to do when she's writing her own books is to leave some empty space, to leave something, for the reader to interpret, on their own.
Quindi ci sono per esempio delle scene che io ho scritto e che poi ho sottratto. Per esempio in Borgo Sud c'è tutta una parte del passato della protagonista con suo marito, il periodo in cui erano giovani e si sono conosciuti e si sono sposati. Per esempio ho scritto credo 3 volte il loro viaggio di nozze e poi l'ho tolto. L'ho tolto perché mi sembrava appunto di dover lasciare questo spazio all'immaginazione del lettore.
So part of the way that she achieves this subtraction is literal. She's been writing, entire scenes in her novels, and then kind of like taking them out of the final manuscript. For instance, in A Sister's Story, she wrote 3 times. There was a lot that she then took out later about the backstory of the protagonist and the marriage and their wedding day and their honeymoon. She wrote 3 times, 3 different versions of their honeymoon, and then took it out. Precisely because she wanted to leave this space to the imagination of the reader.
Un altro elemento su cui lavoro sempre in sottrazione è l'ambiente e il paesaggio. Qui forse posso aprire brevemente sul prossimo libro.
You're cutting off her head.
Oh, okay.
Possiamo dirlo che uscirà in primavera. Ecco, nel prossimo romanzo l'elemento del paesaggio, del luogo è molto importante. Su quello avrei potuto scrivere tantissimo, molto di più. Oltretutto è un paesaggio che mi appartiene profondamente, è il paesaggio in cui sono nata e cresciuta. Mi sarebbe anche piaciuto dilungarmi, e però ho sentito che anche lì dovevo dare pochi elementi, dovevo dare delle suggestioni più che delle descrizioni.
So this work of restraint and elimination is not just extended to characters and scenes and plot, but also to the environment and the setting of the novel. And our next novel that we're publishing in June, called The Brittle Age, the setting of it is really important. It's like a key element of the story. And it's a landscape in Abruzzo, the mountains of Abruzzo, where Donatella was born, and it's like something that is like really dear to her, important for her. And so the temptation was to expand, how much she was like describing it in the novel. But then she decided to cut back and to, restrain herself and give suggestions of this landscape rather than descriptions.
Does it take place in the spring?
I
heard you say primavera.
No, it's coming out in the spring season. Yeah, June.
Insomma, alla fine, per sintetizzare, direi che lavorare in questo modo toglie, secondo me, toglie molta superficie ma aggiunge profondità ed è quello che io cerco.
So when you write in the way that she just described, it might feel like you're, taking out a lot from the surface, but you're gaining a lot in depth.
Right, and the contract with the reader, the arrangement that you're making as a writer with the reader and allowing them to have, like you said, their space.
Questo è come se tu scrivessi un contratto con il lettore, dando loro la possibilità di avere questo spazio di interpretazione.
Sì, io vorrei questo. Non so se riesco, ma è quello che vorrei, cioè una relazione vera con chi mi legge. Chi mi legge non deve stare seduto, rilassato, ma deve interagire con il testo.
Yeah, the contract you just described is definitely her intention. She doesn't know if she's achieved that, but that's what she has in mind when she's writing, to have an active relationship with the reader who's not just like sitting back, but actually engaging with the text, actually, participating.
Absolutely. We're not just, everything is important. Like every word choice, every interaction has been so carefully, like I said, chiseled out. And And is that, do you two ever talk when you are translating?
Not really, but it reminded me that I think in the new book, The Riddle Age, most of the questions I had for Donatello were about the geography of the place.
Oh, that's so funny. Have you traveled to Abruzzo yourself?
No.
Oh my goodness, you have to.
I haven't. Yes, I do.
Yes.
But I will say that what she said is very true, because especially in that book, which of course I haven't read, but the landscape is very important.
Right.
And the places are much more important in a way than in the previous books.
Interesting.
The physical places.
Right.
And she manages to take you to these places that are important, and you understand their importance with just a minimum of description, I would say.
Okay.
But vivid.
Like in a sister story, you have the discrete communities.
Right.
And
right.
you move from that one geography to the other, but it's because of the people that are there, that are impacted by, whether it's the ocean or the town or the city. There's such an important distinction for the characters in a sister story between where they're at the moment.
They are.
Yes. So let me. Does anyone on screen? I'm sorry. I'm moving it around so that you can to get closer to the person who's talking. So feel free, Maureen. That was helpful to tell me I was cutting off her head. So anyway, so does someone have a question on screen? Just tell me.
I just have a comment. I wanted to say that the simplicity of the writing is doing exactly what she wants. It's I have not felt in a long time being taken to where the novel is, rather than being told a story. I mean, I was really in the places, and then you can feel the complexity.
Right.
That the words don't get in your way. It's wonderful.
Yeah. That's true. Does anyone else have a question on screen? I don't want to shortchange you guys. I see. Kiana, were you able to get to the both of them?
I read a sister story and I'm saving A Girl's Return because I didn't want to combine or mix the two up.
Right.
But something that struck me in the book was it's a sister story, but I felt like I was getting a lot of the mother. Wondering what the intention.
Oh yes. And she kept calling her the mother. That's what she does in the other book when you read it, A Girl Returned. I made a mistake in a way by rereading A Girl Returned, because it is true that even though they're like these beautiful bookends, they also complicate because you keep speaking to them. So if you were just trying to talk about one book, your memories of the other book intrude. They amplify it, and they make it beautiful, and it's really lovely. But also it makes it harder for me to just forget, what happened in the first book and the characters and the Vincenzo and the complications that were set up, some of which are never resolved, but they definitely they color the whole rest of they color a sister story throughout. So it's all there, but you don't need to have read it to appreciate a sister story. So I was glad I read a sister story before I went back to A Girl Returned, so that I could read that in such a clean, open way. And it had been a few years since I read A Girl Returned, so and then I went back to it. But it's a very interesting dilemma that we should all be so lucky that we have two such rich books, and then we get to ask them directly their questions about the composition and some of the choices that were made when they were working on the original and then working on the translation. Does anyone in person have a question? Yes, Philip. Hi.
Hi. Yeah.
It's Philip.
I wanted to ask you a question generally about spousal abuse, which is one of the big themes here. I know in the United States it's become, we've had a lot more resources, in my lifetime at least, for women who are seeking shelter from abusive relationships. And I had the sense that it was much harder, at least in this setting, for the sister to be able to remove herself from that abusive relationship. And I was wondering if it was one of your goals or hopes that you would be able to make it easier for people to talk about spousal abuse in particular in this book.
Oh, that's a very good question, Phil. Thank you. Yeah, that is something, because you feel like they're shielding the man. Well, I'm speaking while Eduardo is interpreting to Donatella, but you feel like the whole community makes a wall for both of them, but they don't feel any obligation to help the woman at all. They don't want to go against one of their brothers, even when it's quite obvious what's happening, and when someone is so damaged and hurt in such a way that we feel as Western readers, as more contemporary readers, that someone should do something. So, and that you don't get that feeling there. But let me see what Donatella has to say about that. If Eduardo, okay, he's still translating. This is an interesting experiment. So this is good. This is good. What did you?
I just translated the.
Oh, right. What was her response to that?
Well, she hasn't responded.
Oh, okay. So, well, anybody else have another question right now for a second?
I think she's ready to
Okay.
respond.
Oh, he's going to ask. Oh, in the back. What was your question?
Oh,
we can have it in the air. What is it?
I had a question about the process a bit more, because I was wondering about how the timing, like laying out the timing works. Would you write it like in your head? Are you mapping out all the sequences, or as you're writing it, are you going back and forth between the time as well?
And are you also referring to the conversation between the continuity between the two books, or are you meaning just one book?
I haven't read the other book.
Okay.
I've only read the sister story.
Okay, so that's great. No, that's a very good question. She's talking about the process of the timing. Yeah.
Should we address the
Yes, sure.
first question?
I thought we'd have the other one in the air. Then we can all be thinking about that, and we can think about Donatella's answer.
Okay.
So our next book, we are going to go back to, it didn't arrive sometime with people here. It's called, as a lot of you know, the Ministry of Pain. And that's finishing the books from the authors from the former Yugoslavia. And I'm just chatting with everybody on screen while we're waiting for Eduardo to translate. So we were reading books, actually Celebration is one of those books that we just read by a Croatian author who is a former war journalist, where the forest is an entire character. And I thought that was fascinating, the way they mentioned the Riddle Age. They have the mountains. Michael, is that what you're saying? The mountains are kind of like a character in the book. I was thinking, it's always interesting to know certain books when they have that. Okay, you're on. This is two.
Okay. So to answer the first question, when she writes, she never thinks about like political or social aim first. She's writing about something that is moving her, that is important to her, that is touching her. But then of course, all novels are novels take a life of their own, and then they have stimulated a conversation initially about these themes, But this is not something that is at the beginning of her writing process. And she doesn't like as a reader when in a novel a political intent, a social intent is very much in the foreground. She doesn't like to be told, what the political aim of the book is. But then, of course, she can be pleased when a conversation starts around these themes and there is a political social effect from literature. But it's not, something that is part of her writing process.
Well, and it's a different book to every reader.
Yeah.
So every reader's going to notice different things, and I thought that was interesting. That was, we were talking about the process, and then Philip was talking about the domestic issues, and it's really wonderful. And did you want to speak to the reception of some of the themes in the book? Okay.
And what was the other question?
The other question was, she was talking about the process, how much you plan out ahead of time. We're talking about the things that you take away, but how much?
I think she's about the timeline.
The timeline in the book.
È vero quello che diceva prima Anna, ci sono sempre diversi piani temporali, solo che questi piani temporali si mescolano in un modo che a volte forse può creare difficoltà sia di lettura che di traduzione.
What Anne was saying before about timelines, that there's a lot of very intersecting timelines in her novels, is true. And they might seem complex at first, but then if you follow them, they kind of of course make sense.
In particolare in Borgo Sud, cioè questi piani temporali non sono separati, anche nel prossimo non sono ben separati, ma si mescolano continuamente. In questo io cerco di riportare sulla pagina il flusso naturale della memoria, cioè come funziona realmente la memoria, almeno la mia.
The timelines, especially in A Sister Story, but also in the next novel, we'll see, The Brittle Age, are not very neatly divided. There's always a connection between them. Sometimes the separation between the timelines is porous. And in writing in this way, she wants to render on the page how memory actually feels in real life. We're always kind of in conversation with our past selves.
La mia memoria non segue un andamento lineare che va dal punto A al punto B, ma credo che tutte le memorie siano un po' così e giochino continuamente andando avanti, indietro e poi di nuovo ancora più indietro e poi tornando avanti. La memoria è un flusso che funziona per libere associazioni, non rispetta appunto la linearità e io cerco di riprodurlo sulla pagina nel modo più naturale possibile, anche se a volte può essere faticoso seguire questo andamento.
Her memory, and she thinks anyone's memory, it doesn't follow a neat chronology. It's not like it's neat succession
It's
of
very
events.
porous.
It's like associative,
Yeah.
and moves back and forth between the near past and the more remote past. And it's exactly this flowing of time and memory that she's trying to render as truthfully as possible on the page, even if that sometimes can create a little bit of a challenge for the reader to follow. She wants it to reflect the true experience of remembering.
I think what's interesting is she's sort of describing stream of consciousness.
Sure.
But it's not like reading stream of consciousness.
Right.
It's much more pared down than what we normally think of as a stream of consciousness writer.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Yeah, it doesn't have to just keep going in between. It takes you with it. It doesn't like make you stop. I think that's one of the things I like about the novel myself is that it doesn't make you stop in between the different time periods. And I think that's a very skillful way that you've echoed, mimicked our memories, the way that associative feeling works, and that you've captured that so beautifully and so effectively in the book. Oops, sorry. Does anyone else have a question on the screen? Took one from in person. Kathy, did you have a question?
No, I'm right now. I read both books, all right.
Okay.
And I'm very glad actually that I read
Yes.
A Girl Returned first.
Okay.
It was so rich.
Yeah.
It was wonderful. And I think I would have been a little bit lost in the sister story without that. But maybe it's just because I had that knowledge going into the book. So it would have been interesting to do what you did, to leave some time lapse between them.
Yeah, before going back there.
Yeah, but I felt that fluidity much more in a sister story in terms of the time.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
One thing that did strike me, and I don't know if it was intentional, it does not seem like men are presented very well.
You can hear the laughter in the room.
Like, there was something behind that, or what the author truly felt about. Was it just oops?
Well, it could be. It also could be. I mean, if that somebody is to be believable, that if certain things happen to you, then you certainly would. It seems like it would authentically impact your feelings. Like even if Donatella didn't feel that way, but her characters felt that way, then she's got to present it the way her character is impacted.
Well, on the point of men not being particularly, well portrayed, or it's more like not making a great impression in this book. She said, "Wait until the next one."
Okay, that's interesting.
They were distinct.
Yeah, that's not the phrase I meant. They just weren't likable. What'd you say, Julie?
They just weren't pleasant.
Yes.
They were
fleshed out. Yeah, they were fleshed out. I misspoke, but they definitely had some of the stories that they felt compelled to share.
If you're interested in this, like, add something about the portrayal.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Yes.
Non è un giudizio generale e generalizzato sugli uomini. Io racconto ogni volta una e una sola storia. E può essere sì che gli uomini ne escano male. D'altronde io sono figlia di un mondo assolutamente patriarcale, e questa violenza l'ho vista prima. C'era anche l'altra domanda, no? Su questo, la violenza nel matrimonio, nelle famiglie, anche dei padri sulle figlie. Insomma, vengo da quel mondo lì e lo racconto. Poi non tutti i personaggi maschili ne escono male.
Our intention is not to give some sort of generalized commentary on men or masculinity. She's always telling one specific story in her novels. That said, she comes from a world that was intensely male-dominated, patriarchal, and she has been the witness of the power of men and the violence of men against women in the home and outside the home. So this is the type of male-dominated universe that she's writing about. And even if there are some men that are not negative characters in her novels, that is the context that she's writing inside.
Does she have the changes? Like from the first book was in 1975, and this takes place in theoretically 1990, 20 years later in 1995. Does that?
Well, if you read the book, you wouldn't ask that. If you haven't read the book, but you wouldn't ask that question. But she's asking, chiede se hai notato un cambiamento tra il
The new one, I think he's talking about.
la prima decade degli 70 che è nella minuta e agli anni 90 dell'età fragile. C'è un cambiamento in questa violenza delle donne, forse l'età fragile rivela di no, però forse nella presente dell'età fragile si fa un cambiamento.
Sì, direi di sì. Per esempio il modello paterno che ha avuto la protagonista Lucia, che racconta è totalmente diverso dal padre, che è il marito di sua figlia, che poi sia anche lì un padre poco efficace, ma sicuramente un padre non autoritario. Però io volevo, magari poi rispondere
on the question of, do you notice evolution of kind of gender relations in Italy throughout the time period that you're writing? I mean, the Brittle Age is going to be set in two different timelines, not surprisingly, and one is in the 90s and one is in the present day or during the pandemic. And the 90s story, I feel like there's a lot still of violence and a lot of kind of male violence, but things that definitely change in the 2020s timeline. There are two, especially father figures in the story, you'll see, and they are very different. There's an older man who's the father of the protagonist, Lucia, and he's from a different generation. And then someone who's in his 40s and 50s in the 2020s, who's a different type of man. She doesn't know which one, which portrayal is more flattering, but they're definitely different.
Well, what about Morelli in A Sister Story? What is she? How are we supposed to? How does she intend? What is Donatella's feelings about Professor Morelli?
Professor Morelli, un po' qual è la tua impressione di questo personaggio come maschio?
non mi sembra un maschile particolarmente negativo, ma soprattutto in A Sister Story il personaggio maschile che non ne esce male è Piero. Piero provoca molta sofferenza nella protagonista, ma soffre anche lui, e questa sofferenza di entrambi nel matrimonio è dovuta al fatto che cadono in questo matrimonio che non è una vera scelta, ma è una soluzione difensiva nelle loro vite. Non so se sono stata.
On the question of Morelli in A Sister Story, she doesn't think is a particularly negative figure. Who she thinks is a more positive male figure, male character, is Pietro. who, he of course causes a lot of suffering to the protagonist, and a lot of, of course the collapse of the marriage, but it's only because he's also suffering and he's also vulnerable.
E dunque è vero che appunto provoca molto dolore Piero, ma è anche vero che all'inizio di questa sua relazione con la moglie, con la nostra protagonista, lui non si è ancora individuato come persona, non si è ancora definito, non si è ancora trovato, in quanto viene da una famiglia molto soffocante, molto repressiva delle emozioni, dei sentimenti, e dunque Piero soltanto nel matrimonio riesce ad avere uno spazio in cui individuarsi, in cui trovare chi veramente è.
So the root cause of the suffering that Piero causes in the marriage is because he hadn't found himself when the relationship with the protagonist started. He wasn't himself yet, and that was because he grew up in a very suffocating family environment, and it was only in the space of the marriage, in his relationship with the protagonist, that he was allowed to find himself, to find his own identity, and that caused suffering to the protagonist, but at the same time, it can be an entirely negative process.
Does anybody in the audience have another question? I'm gonna put Anne on the spot and see if Anne has a question. If you were just sitting there and we were eavesdropping, we were like flies on the wall, and you wanted to ask Donatella a question while she's here from Italy, what would you ask her?
I did ask her something.
You already asked her
already.
some? Oh,
I mean, like the timeline question
Yes.
is really one that interests me a lot.
Yes.
Because, as I said in the very beginning, that's one of the hardest things to translate, is to be sure that you're going to be able to follow, that the reader's going to be able to follow where you are in time. And I found, of course I've read these books now many times, so I know just where I am. But when my first readings, I would get confused a lot, and a lot of it depends on verb tenses. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they work. Sometimes they don't work. Sometimes I don't know. I can't quite think of other ways that it's possible to indicate the different timelines. But that's really one of the questions that I would have asked her.
Okay. Yeah, because I was just so curious to, what these conversations might be like, about the work that you two do together, because you've worked on so many books together now.
Yeah. Mostly I work on my own, and then I ask another questions.
Sure.
She always responds immediately.
Oh, yeah, that's wonderful. Wow. Does anybody on screen have any questions for, somebody, let's see, I picked up, somebody is waiting to be admitted from a while back. Does anyone, do any of you guys have any questions on screen? Suzanne? Linda? Amy? I think it's especially great that we have both of them here today, that we're so lucky to get to have Anne, and we get to have Donatella, and Eduardo, you've been doing such a great job of translating. Do you want to translate what you're just referring to right now?
Oh, I was just translating Anne's question.
Okay. I said we are very honored, so I meant to memorize that in Italian. No, I know a few words. Yes, my dear. Yes, Susan?
I'd like to ask Anne a couple of questions. She's from Maplewood, I'm from Patterson, and the idea that somebody would become a translator of Italian literature fascinates me. So how did you get into it? And are you going to keep on doing it? Because I saw that you edited some Primo Levi. Are you going to do more editing, or are you going to keep on translating?
No, I'm just translating now. That was a particular project, the complete works of Primo Levi. I mean, I translated some of the books and I edited the other ones. That was a gigantic, multi-year project.
Well, to amplify Susan's question, when did you fall in love with Italian?
Well, I really probably in college when I took a class in Dante, but I didn't learn Italian until long after that, and then I just fell in love with it. I mean, I already was in love with it. Then I just decided to pursue it, to try to get to really understand it, which I don't.
Were you bilingual in any other language?
No. I mean, I studied other languages,
Yeah.
but I'm not very bilingual. I mean, I wouldn't call myself bilingual.
Yeah, we're trying
Italian.
Well, Italian, I mean, that's a good question, Susan. So you guys heard Susan's question, how a young woman from Maplewood falls in love with Italian. Susan, did you have any, was that the?
Well, I actually, I go to Paris all the time, but I don't translate Talmud. So how did you?
I was studying Italian, and I really somebody gave me a book in Italian that, and I wanted to. I thought that if I tried translating it, I would understand the language in a different way from just studying it, or going to Italy. It just gave me a different insight into how the sentences worked, how the grammar worked. Just the sound of it, and I think that was really how I got started.
Well, if I could say, and this might be a bit presumptuous since I don't speak Italian, your translations seem to be so felicitous. They're just like such a gift for us. We have read over the last many years in many languages, and boy, some of the translations have sucked. It seems to be at the other end of the continuum of that. So thank you very much.
The other end of that?
The other end of that is terrific. I think your translations, the quality of the writing of the author might be in part yours.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but
you don't have to. I just
well, does anyone? I'm just checking my watch, not because I think we're not having fun, but I just thought I should ask if there are any other questions in the audience. I don't want to feel like I'm neglecting you guys. Yes, David.
Quick, one of the things that I loved about the book was that it was very moving and it was very absorbing, and it was absorbing because the rate of revelation was so beautifully done. This little, even from the opening chapter, and what I am more amazed at is that it was done the way that it was done while still retaining the verisimilitude of the thought of the narrator. You're never jarred hearing thought and thinking, oh, that's just the author needing to explain something at this juncture. So you're convinced that the characters, the psychic distance is really close, but as a reader you're given just and only just what you need to want to be hungry for more. But my question is, was there, in composing the book for you, a significant discovery at any point in the process, not just about, for example, how much to write about, pretend to the honeymoon between the main characters, but any other element of the book, your understanding of the character changed or altered? Anything fundamental that to you was a surprise as you were working?
Oh, that's a great question. I love that question. The idea of what changes as we're working. I mean, because you discover things, about your characters in a lot of cases. I would assume that that's, sometimes some authors complain that their characters get away from them and develop a mind of their own, and other ones have a pretty firm idea, other authors have a pretty firm idea. So we'll know in just a moment where Donatella sits on that continuum. You could say it, and we can hear you like talking to her then.
La sua domanda era principalmente su hai parlato di come hai scritto le parti sulla linea di merito, le volte ci sono stati altri episodi in cui hai scoperto qualcosa di nuovo dei tuoi personaggi mentre stavi scrivendo, cioè la tua relazione con loro è cambiata o la loro storia è cambiata perché il rapporto con loro è cambiato.
Sì, anche questa è una domanda molto interessante. Per me tutto si svolge scrivendo. Io non riesco ad avere prima un piano dell'opera. Ogni volta ci provo, ma se riesco a farmi una specie di scaletta, poi la tradisco completamente.
The story for her, the narrative always unfolds as she's writing. She sometimes tries to have like an outline of where she wants to go with the story, and then even when she's able to write one down, she knows that she's always gonna end up deviating from it.
Poi ci sono anche altre scrittrici italiane presenti questa sera e sarebbe interessante anche sentire il loro rapporto con i personaggi. Per me è un rapporto che si costruisce nella scrittura. Quando io comincio a scrivere un romanzo, parto da una singola idea che però per me è molto forte, è bruciante e mi costringe a scrivere quel libro. Ma oltre quella idea di partenza, io so molto poco dei miei personaggi all'inizio.
There are like other Italian writers in the room, and she would be curious to have this conversation with them. That she's saying that she knows very little about where she's going when she's starting a project. All she has, she's writing from an idea, a central idea that is very powerful, very burning, kind of concern. But besides that, she knows very little about the characters or the story when she starts out.
E così come succede nella vita reale con le persone che incontriamo, così mi succede nella scrittura con i personaggi. Li conosco poco a poco, mi si rivelano poco a poco e alla fine magari possono essere molto diversi da come li immaginavo all'inizio. E questo è proprio mimetico della vita vera, delle nostre relazioni con le persone significative della nostra vita. Per me è lo stesso, anche con i personaggi. I personaggi diventano proprio protagonisti della mia vita mentre li scrivo.
For her, it's exactly like meeting people in real life, getting to know them. That she feels like the relationship with her characters is the same. You think you have a certain idea of them, and then by spending time with them, your perspective on them changes, your relationship with them changes, and she feels exactly the same. It's like something that is entirely mimetic of experiencing, getting to know people in the real world. And they almost become like, some protagonist of her social life, these characters that she develops as she's writing them.
E per esempio io non so mai all'inizio come finirà il libro, e solo da questo corpo a corpo con i personaggi che scaturirà un finale che comunque sarà sempre aperto, perché io voglio sempre lasciare ai personaggi una libertà sulla loro vita e sul loro futuro, quindi non riesco mai a scrivere dei finali chiusi, definiti e definitivi.
Like when she's writing, she never knows when she's beginning to write how the story's gonna end. And the ending almost emerges from this like almost physical relationship that she has with the characters, you know, and even when she does write an ending, because she has to, you might have noticed that in all of her books, the endings are never clear cut. You know, there's always room for interpretation, exactly because she wants to leave her characters some sort of freedom, you know, somewhere to go. She doesn't want to write an ending that is final and definitive.
Does that apply to the sense of openness? Does that apply to not just the structure, but to the characters themselves, like that change in the characters, the personalities of the characters? I mean, you know, is the action changing the character's behavior, you know, like that interaction between the character development in the book and the direction of the book? You know, are those things how are those things impacting each other? Is that clear?
Yeah, I think so. Il modo in cui magari se cambi la struttura
I guess
del romanzo mentre lo stai scrivendo.
Anybody have one more thing? We should probably, I guess we have to close it out. We've probably kept them a long time. Michael, thank you so much. This is wonderful. Michael's from
Magari poi cambia anche l'interiorità del personaggio, non solo le azioni, il contesto, si evolvono insieme.
Sì, sicuramente, perché quello che i personaggi decidono di fare è sempre poi un riflesso della loro evoluzione interiore.
Yeah, there is a very close relationship between the interior evolution of a character and how the plot changes and develops. Like, because what the characters decide to do in the plot is a reflection of their internal journey, and the plot, you know, in turn affects, you know, the way that they interact with it.
It makes sense, and yet it's so insightful too.
Cioè un personaggio nella scrittura ci può anche sorprendere. Naturalmente con questo non voglio dire che i personaggi siano delle entità autonome e che noi stiamo lì e scriviamo sotto dettatura, non è così magico il processo di scrittura, però è vero, almeno per me è vero, che scrivendo i personaggi sono in parte riflesso di me che scrivo, ma hanno anche una loro autonomia che io gli creo, che io gli traspondo, perché sono io che li invento. Ma la sfida è proprio quella, inventare dei personaggi che però possano anche diventare autonomi da me che li invento e possano anche sorprendermi.
She doesn't want to go as far as to say that you know, like you're writing under dictation and that the characters are some sort of like, you know, outside entity and you're just like transcribing their story. Of course, you know, the characters are a reflection of the writer, a creation of the writer. But at the same time, I think like the real challenge for her of writing is to create a character that can surprise you as the author, and that can be a part of you, but also can acquire a life of their own almost.
I guess we probably have to close it out. Well, thank you guys so much. This has been so amazing. Molto grazie.
Sì, grazie, è stato bellissimo per me, grazie, grazie.
Grazie
anche Isabella.
Yeah, Isabella, last year, you're a very wonderful audience. Yes, the youngest one here. So, but yes, and thank you for all you are new to the group, for the patients with the technology, because we have this hybrid format. But you're welcome to come. Next time we'll be in a little circle, but we won't have such luminaries. And you can go online on the website, or if you want to get the newsletter for this particular group and what we have coming up, you can just come up to me and give me your email address, and I'll add you to the list and everything. And some of you have come before, and nice to see new faces and old faces, and so it's really wonderful, especially on a night like this. It's very special.
Thank you.
Great hosting. Thank you.